Hi, today you're with Cody and Pete, and we're going to discuss the stitch plates again. So in a previous video, we talked about how to remove and take off the stitch plate and how to tell the machine that we've adjusted the stitch plate that we've used, that we put on. But we'll go over it again. So here in this left-hand column is where our stitch plate indicator is. So this is where we tell the machine what stitch plate we've put on. So just by clicking on it, at the bottom you'll have a list of different stitch plate options. So on this Bernina 770, because it's a 9mm stitch width machine, you can see we have the 9mm stitch width option. Then we also have the 5.5mm stitch width option. This stitch plate is excellent if we're doing detailed stitching on lightweight fabric where we may want a small zigzag or a small decorative stitch, but we don't want this large opening of the 9mm because of the delicate fabric we're working with. That's where the 5.5mm comes in handy. I absolutely love that stitch plate. Our other stitch plate is our 0mm stitch plate. So this stitch plate only allows for a straight stitch. That's Pete's favorite stitch plate. And our other two stitch plates are rarely used, but that's the needle punch for wool felting and then the cut work, which is almost identical to the 0mm stitch plate. It's also a straight stitch plate. But what I want to talk about is the differences in how the machine reacts to the stitch plate. So for instance, we have the 9mm stitch plate selected. So let's exit out of this little window so you can come here. Just say we go to one of the decorative stitches. We'll say my trusty little flower. So we automatically select when we select the flower, it automatically defaults to a 9mm. We can make it smaller if we want, using our multifunctional knobs on the right, but that's as big as we can make it is the 9mm. So now if we come to our stitch plate and say, okay, let's change it to a 5.5mm stitch plate. So you can see on the side, it changes to 5.5mm, and then if we look at our screen, it also changes to 5.5mm. So if we try to make it bigger, you'll see it change, and it will go up to the 9, but it turns our design red. So that means it will not stitch. And another thing I want to point out is the design we see on the screen. The beauty of these Bernina screens on the Bernina machines is it's to scale. So that's the exact size it's actually going to stitch out. So if we want to get an excellent idea of what the size of our design is going to be, we can see it on the screen, and that's what we can expect to get on our fabric. So you hit the little clear button, and it'll bring it back to 5.5mm. So if we go and change it to the 0mm stitch plate, we X out, all we're going to see is a straight stitch. So if we try and select these other stitches, the stitch width, which is indicated up here, is not going to change because it can't. The needle can only stitch in the center needle position. However, when we do change, you'll see the stitch length change, because that's something that can adjust. But when we're working with a straight stitch, the 0mm stitch plate, we're only ever really going to use a straight stitch, which we can come over to our knob and we can adjust our stitch length, and you can see it change on the screen. But that's it when it comes to stitch plates. All right, happy sewing.